ASMR segment, this month's ASMR episode. I don't know what we're going to be calling it, but we're back with the ASMR. Today I am going to be doing a little bit more reading for you guys. You guys really seem to like that one. And a lot of people said that they wanted me to do the whole book, which, like, whoa, relax. I don't know about that. But I will read some more for you guys. I don't mind reading. Like, I love to read, obviously, but I don't have that much interest in this book. I'm not gonna lie to you. I don't know why. I've started this book like 3 times and I just can't get with it. I love the movies, but I don't know. So we're going to be doing some reading today. So I'm excited. I never said what we were going to be reading. Very professional. But we're going to be reading Twilight once again. Yeah, everyone really liked this video. So I figured I'd continue reading it, and it'll give me an excuse to finish this book, because it's just been way too long since I've had this book for me not to finish it, and I'm kind of ashamed, I'm not gonna lie to you. So let's read it. I've also got some Alani here with me. This is my first time ever trying this, and I didn't really like it at first, but when it was cold, but for some reason now that it's not cold anymore, I think it tastes better. I don't know, is that just in my head? Probably. I didn't sleep well that night, even after I was done crying. The constant whooshing of the rain and wind across the roof wouldn't fade into the background. I pulled the faded old quilt over my head and later added the pillow too, but I couldn't fall asleep until after midnight, when the rain finally settled into a quieter drizzle. Thick fog was all I could see out my window in the morning, and I could feel the claustrophobia creeping up on me. You could never see the sky here. It was like a cage. Breakfast with Charlie was a quiet event. He wished me good luck at school. I thanked him, knowing his hope was wasted. Good luck tended to avoid me. Charlie left first to the police station. That was his wife and family. After he left, I sat at the old square oak table in one of the 3 unmatching chairs and examined his small kitchen. With its dark paneled walls, bright yellow cabinets, and white linoleum. I'm uneducated, I don't know what that is. Floor. Nothing was changed. My mother had painted the cabinets 18 years ago in an attempt to bring some sunshine into the house. Over the small fireplace in the adjoining handkerchief-sized family room was a row of pictures. First, a wedding picture of Charlie and Mom in Vegas. Then one of the 3 of us in a hospital after I was born, taken by a helpful nurse, followed by the procession of my school pictures. Up to the last years, those were embarrassing to look at. I would have to see what I could do to get Charlie to put them somewhere else, at least while I was living here. It was impossible being in this house not to realize that Charlie had never gotten over my mom. It made me uncomfortable. I didn't want to be too early to school, but I couldn't stay in the house anymore. I donned my jacket, which had the feel of a biohazard suit, and headed out into the rain. It was just drizzling still, not enough to soak me through immediately as I reached for the house key that was always hidden under the eave by the door and locked up. The sloshing of my new waterproof boots was unnerving. I missed the normal crunch of gravel as I walked. I couldn't pause and admire my truck again as I wanted. I was in a hurry to get out of the misty wet that swirled was cut in half by a long counter fluttering with wire baskets full of papers and brightly colored flyers taped to its front. There were 3 desks behind the counter. One of these was manned by a large red-haired woman wearing glasses. She was wearing a purple t-shirt, which immediately made me feel oversized. Oh, I'm an idiot. Which immediately made me feel overdressed. The red-haired woman looked up. "Can I help you?" "I'm Isabella Swan," I informed her, and saw the immediate awareness light her eyes. I was expected, a topic of gossip no doubt. Daughter of the chief's flightly ex-wife, come home at last. "Of course," she said. She dug through a precariously stacked pile of documents on her desk till she found the one she was looking for. "I have your schedule right here and a map of the school." She brought several sheets to the counter to show me. She went through my classes for me and highlighted the best route to each on the map and gave me a slip to have each teacher sign, which I was to bring back at the end of the day. She smiled at me and hoped, like Charlie, that I would like it here in Forks. I smiled back as convincingly as I could. This brings back memories for me because when I was a freshman in high school, we moved like 45 minutes. Yeah, we moved like 45 minutes away from my hometown, so I had to go to a different school, like in the middle of my freshman year of high school. So you could imagine how traumatizing that was. Thanks, Mom. And yeah, I remember I had to like go to the office and get like a whole new schedule, and I was so lost and embarrassed, and I had no friends, and it was miserable. But anyway, when I went back out to my truck, other students were starting to arrive. I drove around the school following the line of traffic. I was glad to see that most of the cars were older, like mine, nothing flashy. At home, I'd live in one of the few lower income neighborhoods that were included in the Paradise Valley district. It was a common thing to see a new Mercedes or Porsche in the student lot. The nicest car here was a shiny Volvo, and it stood out. Is that Edward's car? I remember in the movie all the cars were Volvos. I think Volvo like sponsored the movie or something because literally all the cars were Volvos. Still, I cut the engine as soon as I was in spot so that the thunderous volume didn't draw attention to me. I looked at the map in the truck, trying to memorize it now. Hopefully I wouldn't have to walk around with it stuck in front of my nose all day. I stuffed everything in my bag, slung the strap over my shoulder, and tucked and sucked in a huge breath. I can do this, I lied to myself feebly. No one was going to bite me. I finally exhaled and stepped out of the truck. I kept my face pulled back into my hood as I walked to the sidewalk. "What is your next class?" he asked. I had to check in my bag. Government, whichever's in building 6. There was nowhere to look without meeting curious eyes. "I'm headed toward building 4. I could show you the way." Definitely over helpful. "I'm Eric," he added. I smiled tentatively. "Thanks." We got our jackets and headed out into the rain, which had picked up. I could have sworn several people behind us were walking close enough to eavesdrop. I hoped I wasn't getting paranoid. "So this is a lot different from Phoenix, huh?" he said. "Very. It doesn't rain much there, does it? 3 or 4 times a year. Wow. What must that be like?" he wondered. "Sunny," I told him. "You don't look very tan." "My mother is part albino." He studied my face apprehensively, and I sighed. It looked like clouds and a sense of humor didn't mix. A few months of this, and I'd forget how to use sarcasm. We walked back around the cafeteria to the south building by the gym. Eric walked me right to the door, though it was clearly marked. "Well, good luck," he said as I touched the handle. "Maybe we'll have some other classes together." He sounded hopeful. I smiled at him vaguely and went inside. The rest of the morning passed in about the same fashion. My trigonometry teacher, Mr. Varner, who I would have hated anyway, just because of the subject he taught, was the only one who made me stand in front of the class and introduce myself. I stammered, blushed, and tripped over my own boots on the way to my seat. After 2 classes, I started to recognize several of the faces in each class. There was always someone braver than the others who would introduce themselves and ask me questions about how I liked forks. I tried to be diplomatic, but mostly I just lied a lot. At least I never needed the map. One girl sat next to me and both spoke in Spanish, and she walked with me into the cafeteria for lunch. She was tiny, several inches shorter than my 5 feet 4 inches, but her wildly curly hair made her a lot of the difference between our heights. I couldn't remember her name, so I smiled and nodded as she prattled about teachers and classes. I didn't try to keep up. We sat at the end of a full table with several of her friends, who she introduced me to. I forgot all their names as soon as she spoke them. They seemed impressed by her bravery in speaking. To me. The boy from English, Eric, waved at me from across the room. I was there sitting in the lunchroom trying to make conversation with 7 curious strangers that I first saw them. "Oh, we about to meet the Cullens, I think. Let's go." They were sitting in the corner of the cafeteria as far away from where I sat as possible in the long room. There were 5 of them. They weren't talking and they weren't eating, though they each had a tray of untouched food in front of them. They weren't gawking at me, unlike most of the other students, as it was safe to stare at them without fear of meeting an excessively interested pair of eyes. But it was none of these things that caught and held my attention. They didn't look anything alike. Okay, why would she automatically assume that these people sitting together would be related and assume that they should look alike? Like, they could just be friends. This is high school. That's weird. But anyway, one of the 3 boys was big, muscled like a serious weightlifter with dark curly hair. Another was taller, leaner, but still muscular, with honey blonde hair. The last was lanky, less bulky, with untidy bronzed hair. He was more boyish than the others, who looked like they could be in college or even teachers here rather than 30. She said they look old. The girls were opposite. The tall one was statuesque. She had a beautiful figure, the kind you saw on the cover of the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue, the kind that made every girl like shadows, as if they were all suffering from a sleepless night or almost done recovering from a broken nose. Though their noses, all their features were straight, perfect, and angular. But all this is not why I couldn't look away. I stared because their faces, so different, so similar, were all devastatingly, inhumanely beautiful. They were faces you never expected to see, except perhaps on the airbrush base of a fashion magazine, or painted by an old master as the face of an angel. It was hard to decide who was the most beautiful, maybe the perfect blonde girl, or the bronze-haired boy. They were all looking away, away from each other, away from the other students, away from anything in particular as far as I could tell. As I watched, the small girl rose with her tray, unopened soda, unbitten apple, and walked away with a quick, graceful lope that belonged on a runway. I watched, amazed at her lithe dancer steps, till she dumped her tray and glided through the back door faster than I could have thought possible. My eyes darted back to the students, who sat unchanging. Who are they? I asked a girl from my Spanish class, whose name I'd forgotten. As she looked up to see who I meant, though already knowing probably from my tone, suddenly he looked at her, the thinner one, the boyish one, the youngest perhaps. He looked at my neighbor for just a fraction of a second, and then his dark eyes flickered on mine. Is that Edward? Is he the boyish one? He looked away quickly, more quickly than I could, though in a flash of embarrassment I dropped my eyes at once. In that brief flash of a glance, his face held nothing of interest. It was as if she called his name, and he'd looked up involuntarily, response already having decided not to answer. My neighbor giggled in embarrassment, looking at the table like I did. That's Edward and Emmett Cullen, and Rosalie and Jasper Hale. The one who left was Alice Cullen. They all lived together with Dr. Cullen and his wife, she said, this under her breath. I glanced sideways at the beautiful boy, who was looking at his tray now, picking a bagel to pieces with long pale fingers. Okay, everything she's describing about them does not sound attractive, like having dead-looking eyes, looking like a fucking roach. But then she goes on to say that he's inhumanely beautiful. Like, I just don't understand. This is what you like. This is what you're attracted to. I glanced sideways at the beautiful boy, who was looking at his tray now, picking a bagel to pieces with long, pale fingers. His mouth was moving very quickly, his perfect lips barely opening. The other three still looked away, and yet I felt he was speaking quietly to them. Strange, unpopular names, I thought. The kinds of names grandparents had. I'm dead. But maybe that was in vogue here. Small town names. I finally remembered that my neighbor was called Jessica, a perfectly common name. There were 2 girls named Jessica in my history class back home. They are very nice looking. I struggled with the conspicuous understatement. Yes, Jessica agreed with another giggle. They're all together, though. Emmett and Rosalie, and Jasper and Alice, I mean. And they live together. Her voice held all the shock and condemnation of a small town. I thought critically, but if I was being honest, I had to admit that even in Phoenix, it would cause gossip. Which ones are the Cullens? I asked. They don't look related. Oh, they're not. Dr. Cullen is really young, in his 20s or early 30s. They're all adopted. The Hales are brother and sister twins. The blondes. And they're foster kids. Wait, what? I didn't catch that in the movie. Who's Rosalie and Jasper? Are they really? No, they're not. Is that just like a cover-up? Okay, anyway, back to the Hales are brother and sister, twins, the blondes, and their foster children. They look a little old for foster children. They are now. Jasper and Rosalie are both 18, but they've been with Mrs. Cullen since they were 8. She's their aunt or something like that. That's really kind of nice for them to take care of all those As I examined them, the youngest of the Cullens looked up and met my gaze, this time with evident curiosity in its expression. As I looked swiftly away, it seemed to me that his glance held some kind of unmet expectation. "Which one is the boy with the reddish-brown hair?" I asked. I peeked at him from the corner of my eye, and he was still staring at me, but not cocking like the other students had today. He had a slightly frustrated expression. I looked down again. "That's Edward. He's gorgeous, of course, but don't waste your time. He doesn't date. Apparently, none of the girls here are good-looking enough for him." She sniffled a clear case of sour grapes. "She's salty." I wondered when he'd turn her down. I bit my lip to hide my smile. Then I glanced at him again. His face was turned away, but I thought his cheek appeared lifted, as if he were smiling too. After a few minutes, the four of them left the table together. They all were noticeably grateful, even the big, brawny one. It was unsettling to watch. The one named Edward didn't look at me again. I sat at the table with Jessica and her friends longer than I would have if I had been sitting alone. I was anxious not to be late for class on my first day. One of my new acquaintances, who considerately reminded me that her name was Angela, had biology 2 with me the next hour. We walked to class together in silence. She was shy too. When we entered the classroom, Angela went to sit at a black lab table, exactly like the ones I was used to. She already had a neighbor. In fact, all the tables were filled, but one. Next to the center aisle, I recognized Edward Cullen by his unusual hair, sitting next to that single open seat. As I walked down the aisle to introduce myself to the teacher and get my slip signed, I was watching him surreptitiously. Okay, look, I'm gonna need you to use smaller words. Just as I passed, he suddenly rigid in his seat. He stared at me again, meeting my gaze with the strangest expression on his face. It was hostile, furious. I looked away quickly, shocked, going red again. I stumbled over a book in the walkway and had to catch myself with the edges of the table. The girl sitting there giggled. I noticed that his eyes were black, coal black. Mr. Banner signed my slip and handed me a book with no sense about instructions. I could tell we were going to get along. Of course, he had no choice but to send me to the open seat in the middle of the classroom. I kept my eyes down as I went to sit by him, bewildered by the antagonist stare he'd given me. I didn't look up as I set my book on the table and took my seat, but I saw his posture change from the corner of my eye. He was leaning away from me, sitting on the extreme edge of his chair and averting his eyes like he smelled something bad. Inconspicuously, I stiffed my hair. It smelled like strawberries, the scent of my favorite shampoo. It seemed an innocent enough odor. I let my hair fall over my right shoulder, making a dark curtain between us, and tried to pay attention to the teacher. Unfortunately, the lecture was on cellular anatomy, something I'd already studied. I took notes carefully, anyway, always looking down. I couldn't stop myself from peeking occasionally through the screen of my hair at the strange boy next to me. During the whole class, he never relaxed in his stiff posture on the edge of his chair, sitting as far from me as possible. I could see his hand on his left leg was clenched into a fist, tendon standing out under his pale skin. This too, he never relaxed. He had the long sleeves of his white shirt pulled up to his elbows, and his forearms were surprisingly hard and muscular beneath his light skin. He wasn't nearly as slight as he looked. The class seemed to drag on longer than the others. Was it because the day was finally coming to a close, or because I was waiting for his tight fist to loosen? It never did. He continued to sit still like he wasn't breathing. What was wrong with him? Was this his normal behavior? I questioned my judgment on Jessica's bitterness at lunch today. Maybe she was not as resentful as I thought. It couldn't have anything to do with me. He didn't even know me. I picked up at him one more time and regretted it. He was glaring down at me again, his dark eyes she? I asked artlessly. Yes, he said. He looked like he was in pain or something. I don't know, I responded. I never spoke to him. He's a weird guy. Mike lingered by me instead of heading to the dressing room. If I were lucky enough to sit by you, I would have talked to you. I smiled at him before walking through the girls' locker room door. He was friendly and clearly admiring, but it wasn't enough to ease my irritation. The gym teacher, Coach Clapp, I love that. The gym teacher, Coach Clapp, found me a uniform that didn't make me dress down for today's class. At home, only 2 years of PE were required. Here, PE was mandatory all 4 years. Forks was literally my personal hell on earth. I watched 4 volleyball games running simultaneously. Remembering how many injuries I had sustained and inflicted playing volleyball, I felt faintly nauseated. The final bell rang at last. I walked slowly to the office to return my paperwork. The rain had drifted away, but the wind was strong and colder. I wrapped my arms around myself. When I walked into the warm office, I almost turned around and walked back out. Edward Gaudlin stood at the desk in front of me. I recognized again that tousled bronze hair. He didn't appear to notice the sound of my entrance. I stood pressing against the back wall, waiting for the receptionist to be free. He was arguing with her in a low, attractive voice. I quickly picked up the gist of the argument. He was trying to trade from 6-hour biology to another time, any other time. I just couldn't believe that this was about me. It had to be something else, something that happened before I entered the biology room. The look on his face must have been about another aggravation entirely. It was impossible that this stranger could take such a sudden instant dislike to me. The door opened again, and the cold wind suddenly gusted through the room, rustling the papers on the desk, swirling my hair around my face. The girl who came in daily stepped to the desk, placed a note in the wire basket, and walked out again. But Edward Cullen's back stiffened, and he turned slowly to stare at me. His face was absurdly handsome and piercing. Hate-filled eyes. For an instant, I felt a thrill of genuine fear raising the hair on my arms. The look only lasted a second, but it chilled me more than the freezing wind. He turned back to the receptionist. Never mind then, he said hastily in a voice like velvet. I can see that it's impossible. Thank you so much for your help. And he turned to the heel without another look at me and disappeared out the door. I went meekly to my desk, my face white for once instead of red, and handed her the signed slip. How did your first day go, dear? The receptionist asked maternally. Fine, I lied, my voice weak. She didn't look convinced. When I got to the truck, it was almost the last car in the lot. It seemed like a haven, already the closest thing to home I had in this damp green hole. I sat inside for a while, just staring out the windshield blankly. But soon I was cold enough to need the heater, so I turned the car and the engine roared to life. I headed back to Charlie's house, fighting tears the whole way there. Alright guys, we have successfully completed chapter 1. I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't into this book, but I'm kind of into it now that the Cullens have been introduced. It's 10 times more interesting already, and it's super romance novel-y, and I'm a sucker for a good romance novel because I'm exceptionally lonely. It's really bad. But guys, I think that's going to be it for this video. I actually really enjoyed this. It was fun. I liked it, and I'm so glad that I was able to finish chapter 1. I really wanted to finish chapter 1 in the last video, but it took some adjusting, so I'm so glad